Hello everybody, welcome back to another Kaldheim spoiler video. In today's video, I'm going to be breaking down all of the spoilers that have come out for Kaldheim Commander today being January 20th. So today is the last day of spoilers, and actually in this video there are no spoilers for standard. All of the cards in this video are for actually Kaldheim Commander, which it looks like there's a decent amount more new cards. With Zendikar Rising, I think we got 3 or 4 per deck, including the Commander, in terms of new cards and the precons, but with this set with Kaldheim, there is looking to be a lot more. So that's very interesting. I'm going to break down each card, not really looking at it from a pre-con sense, but instead looking at it from a greater commander sense, as, you know, that's what most people are going to care about. In the future, like coming up soon, I'm going to be doing a video talking about the pre-cons more specifically, but in today's video, we are just taking a look at the cards, and I'm going to give you all of my opinions and all that. So again, none of these cards are going to be standard legal, or historic legal, or modern legal, or any of that. It's only going to be legal in legacy formats. So let's jump right into this. Oh, and by the way, if you ever want to get these cards when they come out, they will be available in the Kaldheim Commander Precon decks. Alright. First, we have Cosmic Intervention. It's a 4-cost white instant, and it says, if a permanent you control would be put into a graveyard from the battlefield this turn, exile it instead. Return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step, and then it has Foretell for 1 and a white. So this one is found in the Foretell deck. And what's really interesting about it is it's one of those effects like Brought Back, which Brought Back was a card, I believe, from M20, where it returns 2 cards from your graveyard to the battlefield that were put there this turn. This is kind of a recursion, but only things that leave this turn. But instead, this is a little bit more proactive. Instead of returning something from your graveyard, you're preparing. So for instance, let's say someone board wipes. You, even in like a massive board wipe, like destroy all permanents or non-land permanents, you cast this in response. Maybe you foretold it, and this is an example where I really love Foretell, where, you know, holding up 4 mana is a lot and it's a little suspicious, but holding up 2 is not as suspicious. So being able to foretell this early, you might as well as soon as you can, because if you were going to pay 4 for it, you might as well pay 2 and then 2, especially in a deck that cares about foretell. So that's pretty good. But yeah, I think this is an awesome response to board wipes. You can probably do some interesting things with your own deck where you like sacrifice all your creatures or do something kind of weird. Now they do need to be put into a graveyard. It's not if they're put into exile or something. But yeah, this is a really interesting card in my opinion. It is kind of a savior board, but it also has this foretell part of it that makes it so, you know, 2 mana is not something people are not expecting you to kind of flicker all your creatures for that. And I think this has a lot of really interesting applications. It's not a card that's definitely going to go in every deck, although I could see an argument for like if you're missing a card and you're like, I need a card. This could definitely go in a deck, especially if your play group, because that's a big thing about Commanders, your play group. If your play group runs lots of board wipes, this could be a pretty good answer to that, especially in a deck that has lots of ETB abilities. Alright, let's move on to the next card. The next card is Hero of Bretigard. It's a 3-cost white creature human warrior 1/1, and it says whenever you exile 1 or more cards from your hand and or permanents from the battlefield, put that many +1/+1 counters on Hero of Bretigard. As long as Hero of Bretigard has 5 or more counters on it, it has flying and is an angel in addition to its other types. And then, as long as it has 10 or more counters on it, it has indestructible and is a god in addition to its other types. So this is a white card that cares a lot about +1/+1 counters, and by text on the card, it also cares about exiling permanents from your hand or your battlefield. And what's interesting is, of course, when you foretell a card, like put it into exile, that is exiling something from your hand. So this definitely is going in that deck. If you are running a foretell deck, you're probably running this. But there are lots of really interesting mechanics throughout Magic's history that involve exiling things, not as the main purpose of the card, but just as a way of getting things done. It's kind of like Tybalt's Trickery from this set. It's like it counters a spell, and red doesn't get to do that, but it's just a mechanical way of wording it so that it makes sense. There are a lot of cards that don't necessarily just exile things from your hand, but do it temporarily, or, you know, you suspend something in exile. And so I think there are a lot of really interesting cards that you may not expect with, you know, unique mechanics. This card goes really well in, and of course, it does at its best become a 1/1 flying indestructible god angel. But you know, obviously it's going to have the counters on it, so then it's going to be a lot bigger than that. So I actually think that if you're running a deck, if you already have a deck first off that's like based around suspend or based around something that involves putting cards into exile or flickering cards, this works really well with flickering cards because you exile them temporarily, bring them back. If you have any of those, I recommend putting this card in it. And if you are building a deck probably around this card, which you're not because it's 1 in 100, you're going to want to look for those interesting mechanics, flickering, you know, suspend, foretell, all of that. Next, we have Stoic Farmer. He's a 4-cost white creature dwarf peasant, and when it enters the battlefield, search your library for a basic plains card and reveal it. If an opponent controls more lands than you, put it onto the battlefield tapped. Otherwise, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. Then it has foretell. So this one is not nearly as exciting in one way, but in another way, this is white ramp. It's saying that if you're behind your opponents in terms of lands, you can ramp. And if you're not behind, it doesn't do nothing. It also gets it into your hand. So I think this is honestly a pretty decent card. If you're running a foretell deck, you're probably running it just for the fact that you can foretell it for the same cost as its like normal ability. And if you only technically need 2 lands to get this going because you foretell it, you know, turn 2, and then for turn 3, if you didn't draw a land, you can then do this again and you probably have less lands. So I definitely think there's a place for this, but I just don't know how powerful it'll be. It's not nearly as good as like Keeper of the Accord from Zendikar Rising, but I don't think every card needs to be. This one is just another option for white, and I think that is always going to be a good thing in Commander. Next we have Sage of the Beyond. It's a 7-cost blue creature spirit giant, 5/5 with flying, and it says spells you cast from, I think, did I say Keeper of the Accord was from Zendikar Rising? No, I'm pretty sure that's from Commander Legends. Either way, Sage of the Beyond is a 7-cost blue creature spirit giant, 5/5 with flying, and it says spells you cast from anywhere other than your hand cost 2 less to cast. So using him as an example, which in Commander this won't happen, if he's on the battlefield, you still pay 2 mana to exile it, but then you would only pay 3 mana to foretell it. So essentially, you can get a big discount on all your foretell cards. This one is one of those cards that is really only going to go into a foretell deck, so it is very niche, but in one of those decks, it works fairly well. Next, we have Spectral Deluge. It's a 6-cost blue sorcery, and it says return each creature your opponents control, so it's an asymmetrical board wipe, with toughness X or less to its owner's hand, where X is the number of islands you control, and then you can foretell it for 3. And this is one of those ones where you're actually paying less if you just foretell it. Like, I don't know why you would ever cast it for 6, because you can pay 5 mana and just, you know, pay for foretell, and it's cheaper than the 6 mana. So just always foretell this, unless there's some weird effect that makes it so you can't. But what's interesting is that this is a board wipe that could theoretically happen turn 3. Probably not that great, but if you're running against a deck that's maybe really fast or created a lot of tokens, I would say this is like a budget Cyclonic Rift. It's not instant speed. It doesn't hit non-land permanents that aren't creatures. And of course, it is dependent on the number of islands you control, so there is a lot of downside to it, but it is definitely an asymmetrical board wipe that if your deck is running enough islands, I think you could reasonably play and not feel bad about, especially with that foretell cost drastically bringing down the cost. Yeah, I think it's definitely a good card. Next, we have Tales of the Ancestors. It's a 4-cost blue sorcery, and it says each player with fewer cards in hand than the player with the most cards in hand draws cards equal to the difference. So, unlike a normal wheel effect, which makes everyone discard and then draw up to the highest amount, this one just says, hey, whoever has the highest amount of cards, every player draws up to that amount. So if there are 3 players have 3 cards and someone has 8 cards, every player except for the person with 8 is going to draw until they hit 8 cards. And then you can foretell it for 2. Again, just more foretell cards. And you'll notice there are a lot more commander cards. All of these cards have been for one commander deck, whereas in Zendikar Rising, I think I can name 3 or 4, like I said before. So it's very interesting. I think this kind of signals the fact that there won't be like maybe a dedicated commander product this year. There could be. But I think that if the big advantage of the big commander product of the year is there's lots of new cards, well, we're getting now lots of new cards, even just in normal, like, Kaldheim. Next, we have Ethereal Valkyrie. This is a 6-cost blue and white creature, spirit angel 4/4 with flying, and when it enters the battlefield or attacks, draw a card, then exile a card from your hand face down. It becomes foretold. Its foretell cost is its mana cost reduced by 2. So whenever it ETBs or attacks, you get to foretell something that doesn't have foretell, so it kind of just lets you play around that. Now, I don't know how amazing this is, because if you're running a foretell deck and you're running non-foretell cards just in case you pull this card, that's not great. You need, you know, a couple cards to meet up. But on the other hand, if you are running a normal deck, maybe this foretell thing is actually really, really useful, because if you're running like a super reactive deck, you can start foretelling things, and then you can like react much easier when you need to. So I think this is interesting, and I'd really need to see it in play and how it's built into decks to see how good it really is. Next, we have Pact of the Serpent. It's a 3-cost black sorcery, and it says choose a creature type. Target player draws X cards and loses X life, where X is the number of creatures they control of the chosen type. So this is definitely caring about a tribal card. So if you're running black tribal, you can either draw a bunch of cards or make your opponent lose life. And I think this is a really interesting card. Normally you see, oh, target opponent loses life equal to the number of creatures you control of a certain type, or you draw cards. Oh, that's not as common, but you know, you draw cards equal to the number of creatures you control of that type. But this one is kind of versatile. Now you can try to kill your opponent, but you're going to make them draw cards. So you're probably only going to do this if you can actually kill your opponent, or you can just draw a bunch of cards, which is how I think it'll mostly be used. But for 3 mana, that's actually not a bad rate. Even if you only have 3 creatures of the type, you're drawing 3 cards, losing 3 life. Not bad. Next, we have Ruthless Winnower. It's a 5-cost black creature elf rogue. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player sacrifices a non-elf creature, 4/4. All right, I see this being a really good card both in and out of elf decks. Of course, it being in an elf deck is really good. This is like an asymmetrical effect most of the time. Really awesome. But even outside of an elf deck, if you're not running that many creatures, or you're a deck that cares about sacrificing creatures, you just run this and it won't sacrifice itself, but it'll just be essentially at the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player sacrifices a creature. There are a lot of decks that would do that. Even, and this has the advantage of this creature, you'll always have at least one creature, assuming your opponents don't blow it up. So, you will also have the advantage there. So I actually think this is pretty good both in and out of elf decks. Next, we have Bounty of Skemfar. It's a 3-cost green sorcery, and it says, reveal the top 6 cards of your library. You may put a land card from among them onto the battlefield tapped, and an elf card from among them into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. It's a little expensive for my likings. If this was 2 mana, I would see, I'd play this in most elf decks. I think I still would play this in a lot of elf decks, but it's just not my favorite. It's a little expensive. Next, we have Crown of Skemfar. It's a 4-cost green enchantment aura. By the way, that previous spell did get you 2 cards, so it's not like it's crazy. It's not my kind of spell. Crown of Skemfar is a 4-cost green enchantment aura. Enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 for each elf you control. That's crazy. Okay, and has reach. Okay, that's just kind of nice. Flyers can be really dominant in a game. And yeah, +1/+1 for each elf you control is pretty crazy. Yeah, I don't know what else to say. Elves, their whole thing is making lots of themselves. So yeah. And then you can pay 3 and return it from your graveyard to your hand. So even if they blow up the thing that was threatening their life because it's so big, you can just return it. So yeah, this is probably going to go pretty well in elf decks, and I could also see this being run in a couple enchantment decks, like an Estrad the Masked deck, which cares about enchanted permanents. This is just an enchantment that can keep coming back, and I could definitely see people running it just for that. Next, we have Elder Fang Venom. It's a 4-cost black and green enchantment, and it says attacking elves you control have death touch, so that's just really good. And whenever an elf you control dies, each opponent loses a life and you gain a life. So yeah, if you're running Golgari elves, this is an amazing card to put in. It is not only punishing your opponents for killing your elves, you may just have enough elves where if you swing, you kill them, or they block, and if they block, you kill them. So yeah, this, having this ability on a creature that normally creates a lot of itself and is a 1/1 basically means they're slightly unblockable, like unblockable for 1 turn, and then they die. And I think this is really awesome, especially when you're now giving everything death touch. This is a very, very powerful card, in my opinion. It may be a little slow for some people, and you might not want to just spend 4 mana on it, but generally you're going to be doing some craziness with elves, especially in Commander. So I think that this could do some work. And that is it for spoilers today. Again, I'm not really breaking down the precons, but you could see there was definitely a line there where we crossed into the elf deck. That was with the black card that draws you cards and stuff based on the number of creatures. Either way, if you enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe. There's going to be a bunch of Kaldheim content and non-Kaldheim content coming out really soon. So stay tuned for all that. I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.